And welcome back to Viewpoint Alabama. I'm John Mountz, and we're talking about the election and the amazing shift we have seen when it comes to generational voting habits. Because heretofore, it always seems that the older you get, the more conservative you are, the younger you are, the more liberal or progressive you are. But this election seems to have ushered in a change in that we have a lot of younger people voting to the right, which is something new. Joining me now to talk about this is a Young Voices contributor, Ethan Watson. Ethan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Ethan, as a young voice, and I imagine you tend to skew to the right a little bit, tell me, why is it that we're seeing this shift politically with young people?
I think there's a few things driving this. I think, first of all, young people are sort of breaking out of their echo chamber they found themselves on social media in. So for years, people my age have been in sort of a state of what I call empowered ignorance. And I think the best way to describe this phenomenon would be to use an analogy. So I'm entirely ignorant of the sport of professional hockey. I know basically nothing about it other than that the St. Louis Blues were really good at one point in the last 10 years. The young people my age tend to, with politics, they would go on social media and they would just blow up their timelines saying, hey, the St. Louis Blues are the best team ever, and, you should always support them. And if you don't support them, you're denying their existence as a team and all of this. And they would tune out any information to the contrary, and they would obviously then be flabbergasted if the St. Louis Blues did not win the Stanley Cup. And that's exactly what happened to my generation with politics. They would spam their timelines with statements like, America, I am so sorry that you have to vote for a convicted felon, or to women everywhere that are tired of being so strong. And I think they were really rocked by this election because it subverted their expectations. It broke them out of that feedback loop. And so I definitely think, as Donald Trump gained in the polls, as he, it became less taboo to support Donald Trump after he got shot, people my age started to wake up a little bit and see, okay, there actually is a second side to this.
And another thing is younger people, they tend to like to, and this is just kind of the nature of it, they tend to like to be the underdog. They like to go for whatever isn't the establishment. What's happened over the last 30 years is the Democrat or the progressives have moved into the mainstream so much that now the underground, the subversive, the little thing you do behind closed doors is now conservatism. And so for a lot of younger people, they're realizing that being a conservative is not necessarily, the establishment. Now they are actually kind of breaking out of the mold, and they are kind of bucking the system and being conservative.
That's right. I would say that we are the counterculture now. And I think there's more to it than that subversive nature. Young people, in the past have sort of supported the left because it's a sort of a misplaced sense of empathy, right? My generation seems to believe that tolerance equals compassion, which it really doesn't. My parents were intolerant of a lot of things that I did when I was a little kid, like putting my whole hand in a glass of orange juice. That it's good to me. It's compassionate that they weren't tolerant of that because now I'm a well-adjusted adult. Now, on the flip side of that, compassion doesn't actually equal virtue. Truth is virtue. And my generation has lost any sense of the distinction between those things. But I think what we're realizing is that, conservatives are compassionate too. We're just not compassionate for the convicted felon who needs a sex change. We're compassionate for women like Lake and Riley who were raped and murdered by illegal immigrants. So there's compassion on both sides of the aisle. And I think people my age are starting to realize you can place your compassion on the right without, losing that sense of caring about people as individuals.
And also that compassion is sometimes misplaced because it's being used for nefarious purposes. And in other words, somebody is trying to play on sympathies of people who say, look at, like, a perfect example is what happened with George Floyd. And we somehow, that whole thing, which went from a guy who was passing a counterfeit note in a convenience store, and then he resisted arrest, and then he died likely of COVID, although we don't have the official ME's report on all this yet. But that has been it was changed to a narrative, not just that there was one bad cop, but that all cops were bad. And from that, we had this whole movement of dismantling the police. And it worked out to be much worse for all these communities that used to have not the greatest relationship with police, but it got much, much worse. And it was designed to drive election votes for the Democrat Party. So it was weaponized to do something that was actually worse for the community that it was supposedly supposed to help.
Right, exactly. And I think, part of it is the fact that people my age are, we're not getting married, or we're getting married at a later age. We're having children at a later age. So we have this sort of empathy, this paternal or maternal instinct that's being unfulfilled. And so we're looking for outlets for that, right? That's why children my age, or people my age rather, I'm 22, we're so affected by scenes of, the kids in cages things with illegal immigration, or scenes of the wars in Ukraine or Palestine. But I'm so glad that you brought up the George Floyd example, because I'm sure you remember the black square trend in 2020, where everyone was posting that and saying, I understand that I can never understand your struggle. There was definitely a social contagion aspect to that, right? Young people my age, they wanted to seem like they fit in. They didn't want to be the odd man out who looked uncaring, looked like they weren't involved and woke and socially aware. And so, yeah, you post a black square and you move on with your day. But I doubt any of those people were aware of, say, the intimate details of the Floyd autopsy, or the implications of defunding the police in Minneapolis, which have been catastrophic. I think those people just moved on without their day, which seems innocuous, but it also creates a hostile environment that precludes any information that might better inform them.
And for a lot of these young people, they want to make a difference because, when you go into this world and you say, I'm gonna make my mark in the world, I'm gonna be someone, I'm gonna get out there and do something. And one of the things is positive civic engagement. And it's always been thought that, the left controls civic engagement. The left is where it is when it comes to feeding the poor or helping children to read or any of these things. But when you look more closely at it, it is usually the people who are on the right who are most engaged in those sort of activities.
Oh, of course. I mean, no one knows civic engagement better than the right. I wrote a piece about this in Regular Politics about why we should make Election Day more of a ritual, right? But the idea of going out into your community and being involved with institutions like clubs, churches, other community organizations, that is an inherently conservative thing. And conservatives, we like our charity given to people in our community, people we know, friends and family. We don't want a gun to our head, which is the federal government, taking more of our money and then redistributing it as this bureaucracy sees fit, right? That's not the kind of charity I'm on board with. That's not the kind of charity conservatives are on board with either.
Now, Ethan, one of the things I've noticed is a lot of times politics is like a pendulum. It's swinging left to right, left to right. So it's swung pretty far to the left, and it swung so far that then it now is swinging back to the right again, and that's probably what ushered in Donald Trump and a number, because he has a mandate. Not only did he win the Electoral College, he won the popular vote. We swept in both houses of Congress. Likely there's going to be a few more appointments to the Supreme Court. The government has moved pretty far to the right here with the last election cycle. But as the pendulum swings to the right, it will begin to swing back to the left. And I'm curious what your thoughts are as to what generation will be the generation that tries to pull it back to the left. Do you think it will be the young once again, or do you think that actually we'll have some people on the upper end of the age spectrum who are going to try and bring it back left in the 2028 election?
Well, it's difficult to say, right? Because there's not as clear a divide between the generations as there once was, because of the ubiquity of the internet and social media. I don't have as distinct a culture as a 22-year-old as maybe a 22-year-old in 1960 would have, because I still listen to music that my parents listened to when they were my age, right? Everything's becoming blurred because media and information is so readily accessible. So it's hard to say for sure which generation will do that. But I think it will happen whenever America is truly prosperous again, because social activism is truly a luxury that only the ultra-wealthy, ultra-decadent societies can afford. And people started feeling it in their pocketbooks over the last couple of years. They started feeling energy prices going up. And then they realized, hey, this activism, this is a luxury that I can't afford right now. So I have to get back to the people that are get down to brass tacks and actually just do a good job, regardless of these ridiculous identity politics. So I don't know if it'll happen as soon as 2028. I mean, I sort of hope that we're, insanely prosperous by 2028, but also I know that sort of decadence leads to this social activism, which ultimately springs us back to the left. But I'm hopeful, John.
This is Viewpoint Alabama on the Alabama Radio Network. My name is John Mountz. I'm talking with Ethan Watson. He is a Young Voices contributor. And Ethan, you brought up such an interesting point, because I've thought about this before. The generational definitions have blurred so much, because there used to be a generation was really more defined not so much by just the years are there, but more by a shared experience. And in other words, like the first generation we always would talk about was like the greatest generation, those who fought in the war, because those people went over and they fought by the war. I mean, World War War II. They fought in the war, they all returned, then they all had kids, and they all started families, all at about the same time when the war ended. So that launched the start of the baby boomers, right? That was the boom. And then those baby boomers got to a certain age, and they had kids, ergo Generation X. But then as time passed, there was less and less of these definitive moments where, the population started here, and then they had kids for this next generation. And so you're right, the generations are blurring, because sometimes you have a 50-year-old who marries a 30-year-old, and then the generations are blurring all that more. So now we have these like sub-generations of, 5 years and 3 years, these micro-generations. And again, it's all about the shared experience. There are people who, like in your case, you didn't remember, you didn't see 9/11 happen in real time on your television set. And that's something that defines, I guess, me and Generation X. But there are things that your generation experienced that will shape your political mindset. Like, what would that be to you as a 22-year-old? What is something that you say, COVID, what would it be like the thing that, has kind of formed, I guess, the generation, a micro-generation that you're part of?
Oh, I started following politics when I was a freshman in high school when Donald Trump was elected. But that was mostly, again, because my parents were very interested in that as well. What really defined my political beliefs and made me want to, fight back was COVID, right? I was a pretty soft-spoken kid in high school. I didn't have a lot of, extracurricular activities. I just kind of did my thing and went home. And then COVID took away everything, right? I couldn't see my friends. I couldn't go out. Even if I had wanted to, be playing a bunch of sports or whatever, I couldn't be doing that. And I thought, this is really a deep injustice what they've taken from me. And I got kind of angry about it. I'm going to be honest. And I would hope that becomes a defining moment for my generation, and that becomes like our rallying cry. Like, look what the liberal, blob establishment took from us in their quest for power and control, right? They took some of the best years of our life, my freshman year of college. So many just core memories that I was supposed to be making were stolen from me on the basis of a disease that I got 4 times anyways, and it wasn't that big a deal. And so that was really the moment where I realized, hey, this establishment that we have, this liberal New World Order is not working, and these people actually kind of sneer at me. They kind of hate me. They talk down to me. They call me an idiot and a rube for questioning, hey, are these lockdowns really doing anything? What's the deal with the cloth mask? If I ask the question, they call me an idiot and a science denier. I'm like, look, man, I just want to hang out with my friends and go to a KU basketball game. That's all I wanted, and they stole that from me. So I think COVID was really the defining political moment of Gen Z. That's a
great observation, Ethan. I think you're right, because so much of the COVID lockdown really spoke to the idea of authoritarian rule, and it was antithetical to anything that we've done in America up till that point, where the government came in and said, you can't go to church, you can't go to school, you can't do this, can't do that, you got to shop in this direction. And it wasn't by law, it wasn't by anything like that, it was all by these unelected bureaucrats making rules, and these rules were ruling our lives, and a lot of people said, no, we're not going to do that. And I think that's probably exactly what has ushered in this new, more conservative. And what's so funny is the word liberal, used to be that liberal meant that you were free to do whatever you wanted to, but now liberal means you're free to listen to exactly what the government tells you to do because you're a liberal. It's so funny how the definitions of words keep being changed.
Right, exactly. Well, you're totally right. The liberals, I always use the example of the band Rage Against the Machine, very counterculture band in the early 2000s. Now they're raging for the machine, right? They're always coming out in favor of the lockdowns, and I just think it's so funny.
The Bulls are on parade, exactly Ethan. Right. The Bulls are on parade.
Right, exactly. But conservatives, I think we want to conserve what freedom used to look like, which was not actually licentiousness, right? The ability to do whatever you want, which for a lot of people winds up, dying with a needle in their arm, right? We want to preserve the freedom to do things that are good, engaging with your community, getting married, having kids, working hard, rising up in social status and economic status. Those are the freedoms that we want to preserve. As a conservative, I'm not a freedom absolutist. I don't think you should have the freedom to do anything, anywhere, all the time. I want to preserve the freedoms that lead to a flourishing and good society. And the liberals seem to be, preserving some freedoms, but they're all oriented towards the decay of society, from, sexual deviancy to widespread drug use to mass immigration. All these sort of erode at a society. And maybe that's the definition of freedom that some people want to use, but to me, that doesn't sound like freedom. That just sounds like slavery in the Brave New World sense.
Ethan Watson, a Young Voices contributor, sharing his perspective as a young person who is really seeing the world through a different set of eyes, but a great perspective. And Ethan, for those who want to find out more about the things you've written, because you've written some other material, other op-eds, where can people read more of what you've written?
Yeah, so check me out on X at ERWatson13. That's where I'm trying to grow my following. I post all my articles and media appearances there.
Ethan Watson from Young Voices, thank you so much for joining me this week on Viewpoint Alabama.
Thank you so much for the time.